Hayden Locke, CEO of Marimaca Copper. We're developing the Marimaca oxide deposit and making fantastic progress, but here today to talk to the ongoing drilling success that we're having at our new Pampa Medina discovery, which is shaping up very nicely.
It is indeed, Hayden. Like I saw the press release this morning. This isn't just about high grade anymore. You're showing and demonstrating sort of increased continuity across very large area now. So why don't we kind of pull up a diagram and show people where we're talking about, and then we can talk about what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure thing. So, well, look, the first slide I've got here is just a map showing where we're looking. Really to identify this area here below my cursor is the area where the drilling is focused. But we have a huge project area, which we will get to eventually, and we're now naming it Madrugador Historical Mine, Sierra Norte targets, Pampa Medina targets, Pampa Norte targets. Each of those is the same style of target, but obviously Pampa Medina the most covered in terms of drilling currently. In terms of the current drill program, well, this diagram really shows the story now that we're starting to tell, which is we've drilled 40 odd holes, of which 36 have been mineralised extensively over what we would consider to be economic widths and grades. But what's really exciting about the current batch of drilling is the first drill hole that really caught the market's attention was this one over on the right-hand side, SWRD13, which delivered 26 metres at about 4% copper with 25 grams a tonne silver from 580 metres down hole. These next two drill holes have really shown an extension of that, what we're calling an ultra-high-grade bornite zone, and we're seeing very similar mineralisation. It looks like it's in the same stratigraphy and lithology, so we're seeing the black shales interbedded in the sandstone units and remarkable continuity of that thick, very, very high-grade zone. So, in SPRD 05, we saw 16 metres of 5.7% copper with 62 grams a tonne silver, but that's about 650 metres to the northwest of SWRD 13. And similarly for SPRD 4, it's about 150 metres to the north. Again, 22 metres at 2%. So it's lower grade than what we saw at SWRD 13, but we saw very similar mineralisation, bornite, high-grade silver in patches, and some really nice grades over sort of 5 to 10 metres there. So what we're starting to piece together here is a nice high-grade core, which we think is relatively extensive, and we're going to be trying to follow that up. But right now we're looking at an area that's sort of 650 metres east-west, and we're going to start to follow up on some drill holes extending over probably 650 metres to the north and south.
Okay, so you're showing this kind of continuity in this bornite zone that you talked about, and we're no longer having a discussion about is this mineralised. It's a case of how do you show the kind of scale and the mineability of this? So in the context of your geological model that you started with, how does this change things?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because what we're seeing is, although we're seeing 18 metres at 5%, with 50 grams a tonne silver, which is very clearly an underground, economically mineable underground width and grade, yeah, that's world class in any sense of the word. What we're seeing, and actually I've got some slides here to show the sort of more of the column of rock. This shows a 2 metre by 2 metre downhole of the grades that we're seeing. And the reason we put this in is because we want people to be able to see, well, yes, we are reporting broader intersections of nearly 100 metres at 1.2% copper, which does carry areas of pretty minimal grade. You can see there's a couple of metres here of no grade. There's a couple of metres down here of no grade. But when you start to think about the mining strategy for this, it's where it becomes really interesting. There are mining methods that can allow you to take a much larger proportion of that column if it hangs together, which would materially reduce both your mining cost and therefore your economic cutoff grade, which means you're starting to take a much bigger column of rock. So it really has given us pause. We're now saying, okay, maybe it's not a Kamoa-Kakula, maybe it's not a Kupferschiefer, maybe it's a completely different type of more bulk tonnage underground mining opportunity, which means a lot more of the mineralisation that's below 1% would be captured in that mine plan. And then when you start to think about how the grades and the tons stack up, if you've got an area that's, let's call it 2 kilometres by 2 kilometres at 20 metres true thickness, You might have 120 to 150 million tons of ore in that zone. If you triple that true thickness and you take it from 20 meters to 60 meters, well, obviously you go up to nearly 500 million tons of ore contained. So it can very quickly mean that this goes from a smaller, high-grade underground opportunity to something that is significantly larger, and that's what we're excited about. We still don't know, basically. We're drilling now. We're doing the infill, the sort of the closer spacing, 150 by 150 meter spacing currently. What we're seeing is a continued continuity. We're really happy with the results, and we're hopeful that it'll keep delivering.
Okay, so again, how does this affect your thinking? Not just, okay, now moving on from geological model, in terms of the mineral resource estimate that we've talked about in the past, are you reconsidering the kind of, size and grade characteristics that would kind of make up that resource estimate?
Certainly the scale is looking like it's significantly bigger than we had originally anticipated. We thought it was going to be something significant, but the drilling is now over an area that is confirmed by drilling to be economic widths and grades extending more than 2 kilometres squared, which is a much larger area than we originally anticipated. And there is the potential to continue to extend that along strike. I think what's really interesting about these drill holes is it's appearing that there is quite a coherent ultra high grade zone in the middle, which is also relatively thick. Now, how would that change our thoughts? Obviously, the overall grade of the deposit on average would go up, but it provides a very nice higher grade zone to start any sort of underground project on, which can materially reduce your payback. So I'd say our views are very firmly intact that we believe this has a potential to be a tier 1 asset. The ultra high grade zone really changes our view about the quality of the asset and the potential for it to deliver exceptional return on invested capital.
Okay, so but again, I'm just going to say how you position that to the marketplace, because do you think the market could forgive you maybe not rushing out that maiden resource estimate, mineral resource estimate, if you keep banging out high grade results like this, kind of Great Bear style?
We'd like to get out an inferred resource just to show people, okay, this is a snapshot in time over a relatively small area, and if I go back to the map, we'll be focused on this little area here, basically, in that area, and that'll be the area that we try to get an inferred resource out on. We do have 2 drill rigs, though, extending, and we know now that the trend is very much on a northeast-southwest trend. So we'll be looking to extend the mineralised horizon to the northeast and to the southwest. They won't necessarily be captured in that initial inferred resource, the maiden inferred resource, but we will be very clear in saying this is the inferred resource on a small subset of what we believe is prospective for mineralisation, and we will continue to drill so that people can start to wrap their own numbers around it, but also to show when we put out the inferred resource, there will be, it'll be some preliminary economics wrapped around it, some preliminary mining methods, a little bit of understanding about how you'd actually exploit this, because it's all well and good to have the copper in the ground, but if you can't get it out economically, it's valueless to our shareholders.
For sure. And look, given the deposit remains kind of open north and west, I'm just saying, are you have you got a better understanding of the kind of the bornite-rich horizons that you're finding, and do you understand why that's allowing these kind of extraordinary grades to kind of develop, and how predictable do you think your drilling will be going forward as a result of that understanding?
I'd say the understanding is growing. We're seeing a very strong relationship between the black shales, in particular, the high organic matter zones, which is classic in these sediment-hosted copper deposits, in terms of where the bornite-rich and chalcocite, primary chalcocite-rich zones are. I would say we haven't yet worked out how to make that repeatable, because we do see the black shales very consistently over the whole project area and not always mineralised as well as what we're seeing in the ultra high grade zone. So I'd say as we get more drill data, we will start to understand better the geochemical drivers of why those ultra high grade zones are there. But I would say from a broader perspective, the team is becoming very good now at identifying when they should be hitting mineralisation or target mineral zones, and very often they're intersecting at exactly the right level, and they're being able to sort of visually estimate grades and widths and things pretty well. What's really interesting is some of the drilling that is to come is certainly extending deeper than we had originally thought. Obviously, we don't have any grades yet, but we're seeing evidence of mineralisation much, much deeper in some of the drilling that's coming out, which leads us to a conclusion that potentially we haven't drilled deep enough in the previous drilling. So, look, I think there's still plenty of upside to come from this. It is still at an early stage of discovery, but we are incredibly excited about it.
Okay, and so just thinking of the understanding bit, we talked in the past about potential like high grade sort of stacked Manttos that occurring in and how that obviously helps. But do you think you're moving toward? Well, what is it that you think you're moving towards? Because you're encountering like significant variability at the moment. It feels like. Where have the Manttos gone?
Yeah, well, they're still there. I mean, what's really interesting, let's have a look at this drill hole as an example. So you've clearly got a high-grade Mantto here, and then you've got a slightly barren zone, and then you've probably got another high-ish grade Mantto here. And this is what we're seeing consistently in our drilling. We're seeing, high-grade zones of mineralisation interbedded with lower grade, almost never barren unless it's a late dike or post-mineral dike. Almost never barren, always carrying some grade. So the stacked Mantto theory is still very much intact, but what we're seeing is we're looking at it as a much broader column of rock that is mineralized very consistently across this whole deposit. And so where are we going with it? Well, I'd say we're probably moving away from a Kamoa-Kakula or Kupferschiefer style operation where it's a room and pillar with a paste backfill to a much more bulk mechanized underground mining opportunity, which has commensurate knock-on impacts on mining cost and therefore on your economic cutoff grade, and would make this a much larger opportunity than we had originally expected. So the stacked Mantto is very much intact. We're seeing mineralization in multiple different horizons over all three of our main units, which are the upper volcanics, the middle Rencoret sedimentary unit, and the basement metasediments. And that's what I was just talking about before. If we look at Cachorro, which is the Antofagasta deposit, that was hosted mainly at the bottom of the Rencoret sediments and into the metasediments. We're now starting to see evidence of mineralization in the metasediments, and so that creates a whole new opportunity for us to further grow the endowment of this.
So, but this is starting to feel like it could be a complete standalone project. Right, based on grades and what you're saying about potential for scale, etc. But what does it do for the MOD? What's it do for the Marimaca oxide deposit? If it was standalone, or are you still thinking about them as one big project which they can work together?
It's a really good question. We have been pondering that because it certainly looks like there would almost certainly be some interplay between the two deposits, regardless of how big Pampa Medina gets. But Pampa Medina is certainly feeling more like it would drive to a standalone operation that would piggyback on the infrastructure that we build from the mod. So, we're talking water, we're talking power, we're talking shared supply chain, logistics, acid, all of that sort of stuff. At 25,000 tonnes or 30,000 tonnes of additional cathode, it makes sense to go back to the centralised processing facility. Much bigger than that, you're probably going to build a standalone cathode project. And then, of course, there's the concentrator portion or the sulfide portion of this, which is a completely different project and would require a standalone. So we are still pondering that. But I would say from a strategic perspective, we are still pushing ahead aggressively on the mod. I'd say the one thing we're thinking about in terms of our financing structure is how do we structure our financing package so that we ring fence the mod and therefore preserve our shareholders' exposure to the upside of Pampa Medina, which we think is very significant. And there are some very interesting proposals being made to us that allow us to do that. We can effectively reduce the amount of dilution to this incredible upside opportunity while still progressing the mod and protecting ourselves from that dilution in the downside scenario. So that's how we're thinking about it as a management team. How do we continue to march the mod forward while protecting our shareholders in terms of potential future dilution against what we think is going to be a tier one asset.
Okay, so that kind of return on invested capital component is the decision making at the moment. Interesting. Okay, so going forward, how do I value this thing really? If you've got a bunch more work to do, a bunch more money to spend on Pampa Medina, clearly. And at the same time, well, concurrently, and it's probably the front runner is MOD. Do you think today's valuation is based on both, or is it weighted towards MOD, or are people getting excited by high grade? How do I view it?
Well, I mean, where's our share price today? $7.50 a share. You know, we're down significantly from all-time highs. On a fully diluted basis, we're roughly 1.1 billion Canadian, which is what, 800-ish million US dollars. So on a EV basis, we're sub 700 million US dollars EV. It depends on the numbers that you look at on the mod, but let's assume $300 a ton asset price and $5 a pound copper. If you just assume that those are run through our mod model, it's worth more than our current share price today comfortably. So you're effectively getting the oxide growth component, which we're very confident on, for free, and you're getting all of the sulfide component for free. So, you know, I think there's a lot of uncertainty caused by the Iran war. There's a lot of uncertainty caused by this sudden spike in asset price. We're very comfortable that our asset price will be significantly below $300 a ton. You will have seen the announcement that we put out on our asset strategy. That's progressing very well. And so we are going to partner with this large-scale asset producer, which will provide us with a level of confidence on our asset through the whole life cycle of the Marimaca oxide deposit, which will underpin a value that's well above where we are today. And so therefore I look at this exploration and I say, well, you know, it's effectively coming for free as it currently stands.
Right. And your job now is to kind of stop it being viewed as exploration upside, maybe more as a second core asset within the portfolio.
That's it. Or something that is potentially, you know, starts to get the attention of a major. You know, if you start to deliver a project that has 3 to 4 to 5 million tons of contained copper in it, in the low coastal belt in Chile, with access to infrastructure, with access to Antofagasta, with all of the benefits that we talk about in terms of the Marimaca oxide deposit, but for a significantly larger project, that would grab the attention of just about every major mining company in the world, because all of them are desperate for copper exposure.